This is a story about some of the worst natural disasters that have happened with families' houses slowly flooding and evacuating villages. The villagers of Tambora had always lived in fear of a massive volcano that loomed over their village. They knew one day it would erupt, unleashing its wrath upon them, but they never could have imagined the horror that was to come. The villagers had always been warned by their elders to respect the power of Mount Tambora. It had been centuries since its last eruption, but the elders still remembered the devastation it had caused. They would often tell tales of how the volcano had destroyed entire villages, leaving nothing but ash and death in its wake. But as the years went by, the villagers began to feel a false sense of security. The volcano had remained dormant for so long that they started to believe that it would never erupt again. They went about their daily lives, tending to their crops and going about their business, unaware of the impending danger. One day, the birds stopped singing and the animals disappeared into the forest. The villagers took this as a bad omen, but they couldn't have predicted what was going to happen. The ground began to shake violently, and the villagers could hear a deep rumbling coming from the mountain. Panic set in as they realised that Mount Tambora was about to erupt. People started running in every direction, trying to find safety, but there was nowhere to hide. The volcano erupted with a force that was beyond anything the villagers could have ever imagined. The sky turned dark, and the ground shook so violently that houses collapsed and trees were uprooted. The villagers could feel the intense heat from the lava as it flowed down the mountain, engulfing everything in its path. They could hear the screams of their loved ones as they were consumed by the fiery inferno. The once peaceful village was now a scene of chaos and destruction. Among the chaos, a young woman named Sari was desperately trying to find her family. She had been out in the fields when the eruption began, and now she frantically searching for her parents and a younger brother. But the thick ash and smoke made it difficult to see, and the ground was still shaking, making it hard to walk. Sari's heart sank as she saw her family's home completely engulfed in flames. She could hear the mother's cries for help, but she couldn't reach her. The heat was too intense, and the ground was too unstable. With tears streaming down her face, Sari turned and ran towards the village square, hoping to find some refuge there. But the village square was no longer a safe haven. The once bustling market was now a scene of horror. Bodies lay scattered everywhere, some burnt beyond recognition, others crushed by falling debris. Sari could hardly believe her eyes as she saw people she knew her whole life, now lifeless and unrecognizable. She was about to give up hope when she heard a faint crying for help coming from under a pile of rubble. With renewed determination, Sari and a few others began to dig through the rubble, hoping to find survivors. After what felt like hours, they finally uncovered a young boy, barely conscious and badly injured. Sari recognized him as her brother, and she let out a cry of relief, but her joy was short-lived as she realized that both of her parents were now to be found. They had been in the market where the eruption occurred, and Sari feared the worst. As the days passed, Sari and the few remaining survivors struggled to survive in the aftermath of the eruption. The once fertile land was now barren, and food was scarce. The ash and toxic gases from the volcano made it difficult to breathe, and many of the survivors fell ill. Sari's brother was one of the many who succumbed to the harsh conditions. Sari was left alone, mourning the loss of her family and the village. She couldn't help but feel angry and betrayed by Mount Tambora. It had taken everything from her, and she couldn't understand why. Years went by, and Sari was one of the few survivors who managed to rebuild their lives. But she could never forget the horror of that day. She would often visit the site where her village once stood, and she could still feel the pain and fear that consumed her on that fateful day. As time passed, the village of Tambora was forgotten, and nature slowly started to reclaim the land. But the memories of people who lost their lives there would never be forgotten, and the volcano, now silent once again, stood as a constant reminder of the horror that had taken place. To this day, the people of Tambora fear and respect the power of Mount Tambora. They know that it is only a matter of time before it erupts again. They pray that they will never have to experience the horror of that day again. It was the day after Christmas, and the family of 4 had gathered at the beach house to celebrate Boxing Day. The sun was shining, the waves were crashing against the shore, the smell of freshly cooked food filled the air. It was a perfect day, till the ground beneath them began to shake violently. At first, the family thought it was just a small earthquake, but as the shaking continued, they realised it was something much more dangerous. Suddenly, the water in the ocean began to recede at an alarming rate, leaving the beach completely dry. The family, along with the other beachgoers, were confused and bewildered, but they had no idea what was about to happen. As the water continued to recede, a massive wave began to form in the distance. It was unlike anything they had ever seen before. The family's youngest daughter, Lily, was the first to notice it. She pointed to the horizon, her eyes wide with fear. "Mum, Dad, look," she cried out. "What is that?" Parents followed her gaze and saw the enormous wave heading straight for them. Panic set in as they realised they had no time to escape. The father, John, grabbed his wife and children and ran towards their beach house, hoping to find some sort of shelter. They made it inside just as the wave crashed onto the shore, destroying everything in its path. The force of the water shook the house, and the family huddled together, praying that it would hold. When the water finally receded, the family cautiously stepped outside. The once beautiful beach was now a scene of devastation. The beach house was still standing, but it was badly damaged. The father went to check on the car, but it was nowhere to be found. The mother, Sarah, looked at her children, tears in her eyes. "We have to find a way to get help," she said, her voice trembling. "We can't stay here." As they tried to leave, they realised that the roads were blocked with debris and fallen trees. They were trapped on the island with no way to call for help. As the day went on, the family watched as the water slowly began to rise. They knew they had to find a way to survive until help arrived. They searched the house for supplies and found some food and bottled water, but it wouldn't last long enough. The father tried to use his phone, but there was no signal. The family huddled together in the living room, watching as the water continued to rise. They could hear the sound of helicopters in the distance, but they were unable to get their attention. Night fell, and the family lit candles, trying to stay calm and keep their children from panicking. As the water reached the second floor of the house, the family were forced to move to the attic. They sat on the floor, their backs against the wall, as the water continued to rise. The children were scared and crying, but their parents tried to keep them calm, promising that help would come soon. But as the hours passed, the water showed no signs of receding. The family was now waist deep in water, and they knew they had to find a way out. The father remembered that there was a small boat tied up at the back of the house. He waded through the water and managed to untie it, but the boat was too small to fit all 4 of them. John made the difficult decision to leave his family behind and go for help. He promised to come back for them as soon as he could. The mother and children watched as he rowed away, their hearts heavy with fear and uncertainty. As the night went on, the water continued to rise, and the family was forced to move to the roof of the house. They huddled together, shivering in the cold, and prayed for the morning to come. When the sun finally rose, the family saw they were surrounded by water. They were stranded on their roof, with no one in sight. The mother tried to keep her children calm, but they were hungry and scared. They could see the devastation around them, and they wondered if anyone else had survived. Just as they were losing hope, they heard the sound of a helicopter. They waved frantically, and to their relief, they began to descend towards them. The family was rescued and taken to safety, where they reunited with their father. The family was grateful to be alive, but their experience had left them traumatized. They had survived the Boxing Day tsunami, but they would never forget the terror and helplessness they felt as they were trapped in their house, slowly flooding. It was a day that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy my kind of content, please consider subscribing for videos every Saturday.